72. Chapter 72, Battle Preparations. The preparations for the Battle of Hogwarts were a window into very different worlds whose collision would determine the fate of Wizarding Britain, and by extension, the direction of the next century of the Wizarding world. Flora and Hestia Caro moved silently through Hogwarts, their eyes with their disturbing red iris missing little. The Caro seniors bore the mark of the Death Eaters, but Flora and Hestia had been silent as to their own opinions, seemingly above the infighting Draco had led in the early years against Potter. In truth, the Caro family were not wed to the old pureblood ideology for reasons that Narcissa Black and Severus Snape knew of only in rumor. Their family head was rumored to be a vampire, but considering the rumors surrounding the Black family and Selwyn families, most took it with a grain of salt. Sadly, in this case, the rumor was correct. The Caro family was run by vampires and had served Voldemort in his first rise for the promise of being allowed to hunt again, never registering as vampires for the ministry dole of voluntary Muggle-supplied blood. Successful in denying any involvement with the Death Eaters, for they served only the Caro, and in denying any loyalty to Voldemort, for they didn't care who gave them license to feed upon the magical blood of Britain. They served now as spies, wandering the halls of Hogwarts as it prepared for the final battle, and they had so very much to report. A rock viper curled on the table in the main hall between meals, and between 1 and 2 dozen basilisk would sway in rapt attention bordering on religious worship as Noodle the saga poet and Rock Viper sang the song of the Mouse Giver. Dollar for it was for the Mouse Giver that Speaker came to the Chamber of Secrets and faced the Mother. For it was through Speaker's devotion to Mouse Giver that he faced the Mother and sired the first children of the chamber and freed the Mouse Giver from her slumber. When she rose, the Mouse Giver did not strike down the Mother nor the children of the chamber, but did she move to the holy cauldron that brews death and destruction so that she may make that greatest of all gifts of magic, the Mouse Potion. Noodle paused here as the basilisk swayed in religious or gourmet-driven ecstasy. Their eyes whirling in rainbow rapture, Noodle sang the song of the Mouse Giver. Chocolate mice for scales strong as steel, raspberry mice for swiftness, miso mice for the soothing of growth, ghost pepper mice for the fire of molting, treacle tart mice for those who have dementor taint on their fangs, peppermint mice for sweet dreams, and the fluoride mice for strong fangs, as Mouse Giver is initiate in the mysteries of the dentist, and her serpents shall know no tooth decay. The Caros looked on in something bordering fear, an emotion foreign to the darkest of all houses in Wizarding Britain, the House of Blood, as the familiar of Harry Potter cast some sort of controlling spell in parcel magic that should belong to Voldemort alone on the horde of basilisk who now served Harry Potter. Hermione came into the great hall pushing a spatial expansion cart of mice, containing an unknown but presumably large number of mice, followed by half a dozen house elves and both Patel sisters and Lavender Brown. She pushed through the basilisk to kiss Noodle on the head and hiss something to him, then set off for the dungeons. I'm tired of incendiaries, explosives, and nerve gas, Noodle. I'm going mad. I was talking to Parvati, Padma, and Lavender, and they have me convinced that I should try Indian cuisine for my mouse potions. I'm off to the dungeon to work on curry mice. The girls can't agree as to which style of Indian cuisine would work best in a mouse potion, so we're just going to try all of them. If Speaker comes looking for me, lie and say I'm doing war stuff. Hermione said, and the Patel sisters' eyes went wider than the Caros would have believed possible as Noodle, and the basilisk began bowing to Hermione Granger like the Hindu snake goddess Manasa reborn. Hermione was clearly creating some war-winning weapon. The Caro would interrogate the house elves as to what potion ingredients were being carried to the dungeons, so that Voldemort could be ready for whatever she crafted. The Caro stalked the halls, seeing goblin warriors and a no small number of goblin matrons, the latter in leather aprons festooned with runeworking tools, the former cursing and swearing, and getting smacked by the goblin matrons, as they pulled on work gloves and headed out to the greenhouse area behind Hufflepuff. Casting their best disillusion charms was a mistake, as they were trampled by high-speed Hufflepuffs going every which way, backed by smaller numbers of Ravenclaws and Gryffindors. The smell hit the Caros like a bludger, It was foul. Huge kegs stirred by magical spoons. The size of trolls were being controlled by sweating older students whose wand work was slow and ponderous, befitting the size of what they controlled, as younger students happily levitated various types of magical poop into the cauldrons, while grumbling witches of advanced years controlled the ratio of what kinds of poop, and added various dried mysterious plants to the huge super cauldrons of magically stirred and herb-enhanced poop. Neville Longbottom wandered out from the greenhouses periodically to smell the foul mixtures and chat happily with the grumbling old women, who beamed at him like the second coming of Merlin, if only Merlin needed his cheeks pinched for being so cute as they talked poop sense. Witches and wizards with armloads of seedlings would lead goblins with shovels and wheelbarrows full of poop soup deep into the forest, with a flash of dark scales hinting that basilisk, not acromantula, now ruled these forests. The Carrow slipped into the forest, seeking the secret fortifications of Hogwarts, but what they found was Neville Longbottom and Professor Sprout planting seedlings here and there, hanging bottles of seeds from various branches, while the goblins swore in gobbledygook and dug holes to fill with the incredibly bad-smelling poop soup from the cauldrons. While beside the paths, they did not dig pits to block the paths, nor did they carve any rune arrays into the trees, nor bury explosives or incendiaries. Just poop and plants, deciding either Neville Longbottom was not part of the defensive works, or that this was a deliberate deception. The Carrows decided to follow Harry Potter, and here at last they found what looked like true defensive works. Goblins and Hogwarts arithmancy and rune professors, Vector and Babbling, were arguing with Harry Potter and Professor Sprout over a diagram that covered the whole of the floor of the ancient runes classroom, tables and chairs being of the ceiling where the advanced class were busy taking notes on the work below. They could hear Harry Potter arguing. "We don't want a control formation. We only want a focusing array. Look, we have some student groups chanting, some dancing, some fighting, some meditating. All of them are raising energy of different affinities and pouring it into the 4 Hogwarts house tokens. The control formation is Hogwarts, the whole thing. We just need the students to raise the power, to call it in from the world and from themselves, and fill it with intent to defend the students and grounds of Hogwarts. They funnel it through the founder's tokens and give it to Hogwarts," Harry said. Septima Vector, perhaps the greatest living arithmancer, dug her hands in her hair in frustration. "I can't even begin to calculate how to balance the flow. The input is going to vary wildly, and how will we know what you need for output moment to moment? You will burn out like a candle in a blast furnace if you try to hold this, rather than channel it, even for a second." Professor Sprout smiled. "We don't balance it, we don't command it, we don't control it. This isn't wand magic, rune magic, or enchantment. You won't find an equation that balances it. This is wild magic. You structure your intent, and you give yourself to the magic without reservation. If magic judges your intent matches its need, it will shape its flow to match your intent." Professor Babbling of Ancient Runes shook her head. "And if your intent doesn't match its need, or the power you have called up exceeds what your task requires?" Fangborn, the goblin matron looking over the rune diagram for power flows, grunted as she stood up. "Then your bones ignite, and your flesh explodes as your bones burn like the surface of the sun. There is a reason that goblins keep our rituals small scale. You wizards used to scare the fangs off us when you did large-scale rituals centuries ago. We got ever so much happier when you neutered yourself by letting your ministry ban all ritual magic." Harry spread his arms. "Look, see. I have almost all my bones. Broken a few, sure, but I haven't burned any of them, never even blown all the way up." Fangborn looked at her human son. "Too many qualifiers. If you blow up, do not come crying to me." The Carrows eased back from the classroom door. Voldemort would need to know about this. The true defense of Hogwarts, a large-scale war ritual. Since Hogwarts banned ritual magic of any kind under Albus Dumbledore, they had no idea if what they saw was reasonable or even possible. But Voldemort had used many a dark and forbidden enhancement ritual on himself and his core disciples to increase their personal power. He alone would have the knowledge to judge the threat of this strange working. They slipped up to the owlery to send their messages to Voldemort. Break. Millicent Bulstrode was happy. Fred and George Weasley were somewhat less happy, but riding on her flanks on their brooms, They wielded their beater bats with the sort of unity that made other Quidditch teams gnash their teeth. Millicent Bulstrode had never really felt tested by anyone or anything save Neville and Harry when they worked together. The two Hufflepuff beaters had made her taste the kiss of a high-speed bludger more than once, forcing her to make the great strength and speed she had been born with move to a level of perfection that went beyond skill, drawing on the magic of her core and the connection to the world that made every molecule of water in the air like a perfect precision marker, a point of space and time perfectly plotted in her mind. The movement of her beater bat was the irresistible force of the springtime river at flood, flowing with crushing power and inevitable speed. The shattering of centaur arrows, rather than the anvil ring of a deflected bludger, was the only indication that she was riding her broom not upon the Quidditch pitch, but into the teeth of a centaur arrow storm, each arrow of which could punch through the bole of the largest oak tree or muggle-armored personnel carrier. Long hair swirling in the cold fog that flowed from her body as the elemental cold of her magic flooded the sky and drew lines of white frost upon the ground. The mad laughter of the witch blended with the twang of bowstring, the hammer of hoof, and the shattering of arrow after arrow as she rode through the storm and struck at the leader of the centaur herd. Nessus, lord of the forbidden forest herd, had warned the witch and her two wizards away, had ordered them to leave his forest or be slain. Instead of fleeing, she had drawn an oaken bat wrapped in rune-worked bronze and charged him on her broom. 20 centaur drew their bows, and arrows flashed, driven by magic and muscle no pathetic human could match. The crack as they broke the speed of sound, and the crack as they exploded on the bats of the charging humans were lost in a single rolling explosion. It took less than a minute for the witch and her two flanking wizards to spiral around the herd, forcing them to stop shooting lest they kill each other, limiting the amount of arrows they could launch at a time, and still the mad witch cackled and closed, bat seemingly moving on its own. Nessus felt the air grow cold, the fog close in. The lord of the herd for the first time felt not like an unconquerable warrior, but hunted prey. The witch closed, and while most arrows missed, the ones that struck were struck in turn by her bat, and he saw the wild dark eyes and snow-white face of death as the witch closed at the speed of one of his own arrows. A bat caressed his cheek, then the back of his neck as she touched his head gently in front and behind as she passed through his herd at a speed that would have allowed her to explode his head like one of his own arrows had she not perfectly matched the speed of her bat to the speed of his charge and her broom, so that the bat was almost motionless as it touched him. She counted coup on him, twice in a single pass. He dropped his bow and called the herd to stop. She could have killed him. In fact, it would have been a dozen times easier to strike a full power blow in passing, her on an unstable broom and him on a full hoof charge, yet she chose to demonstrate her superior power and skill by simply touching his face and the back of his neck in passing. His voice sounded again, not in command, for he had lost his right to do so, but in defeat. I am defeated. Witch, may I know your name, who fights as an honest warrior and not a slinking coward with a wand? Nessus asked. Millicent Bulstrode stepped from her broom, the ice of the field rising to make a platform so she faced the lord of the centaur herd face to face. I am Millicent Bulstrode, Lady Selwyn by right of conquest, Witch of Hogwarts, and ambassador of the clan and coven of the Speaker. Millicent said, chest heaving and sweat shining from the greatest ride of her life. She matched the wild centaur warriors in frenzy, fury, and battle skill, or overmatched, to the point the centaur warriors found themselves shifting back to put their herd lord between them and this most unusual witch. Nessus bowed his head. You have defeated me, Nessus the herd lord, in honest combat. You counted coup upon me twice, when none in my herd could lay an arrow on you. You struck before I could even draw my blade. Centaurs have been bested by wizard magic, by wizard tricks, but only once have we been bested in open combat, and that was by Godric Gryffindor, who bound us to guard his castle and the children he trained in it. Millicent thrust out her chest and raised her beater bat high. Well, I am a Slytherin. Beating Gryffindors is a moral imperative. Fred objected. Hey, we beat you 190 to 40, George concluded. Last game. Millicent slapped her bat in her hands and asked, You found out in the hospital afterwards. I knocked both of you off your brooms and had your chasers on the run. Not my fault Draco was too busy striking a pose to catch the snitch. Nessus followed the conversation, noting the wizards who followed her and defended her flanks were indeed in Gryffindor crimson as she was in Slytherin green. You fight together, Gryffindor and Slytherin? Nessus asked. Millicent smiled. We follow Harry Potter, Goblin raised of Hufflepuff. A Ravenclaw seer dreams for us, and we weave our magic in clan and coven, bound to the land, bound to each other, and bound to the protection of all magical creatures and races who stand with us. Nessus snorted, shaking his head in disbelief. Like the time of the founders, when Godric Gryffindor bound us to defend the forest and the castle he protected and made a school. Centuries ago, when the words of wizards meant something, before your laws and rules chipped away at the freedoms of everyone who didn't wield a wand. Millicent sneered at him. No thing not earned, Nessus. If you want equality, take up your arms and earn it. An army marches on Hogwarts. The ministry is fallen. The Wizargamot is fallen. Only the clan and coven dares to take the field. If you want a voice tomorrow, let your bowstrings sing today. Nessus stepped forward. You offer us a place as equals, a voice in council. Millicent smiled. Harry Potter is a lord, a goblin and speaker. In our councils are Muggle-born, goblin, basilisk, pureblood, half-blood, lord and commoner. Those who will have a voice in years to come will let their magic and their weapons give song today. Nessus took the horn from around his waist and held it out to her. Millicent Bulstrode, of the clan and coven of Hogwarts. Sound the horn when battle comes, and I swear I will bring every bow of the herd to answer. Millicent flew her broom in a corkscrew, cackling madly as she looped Fred and George. That was awesome. If I knew diplomacy got you shot at this much, I would have paid more attention to Auntie's lectures. Have you ever had so much fun? Those arrows were faster than Muggle bullets and hit like cannonballs, not bludgers. If we hadn't put all those runic reinforcements in the bats, I think I would have had my arm torn off. Morgana's slippery nipples, but that was fun. Millicent cheered. Turning to Fred and George, she batted her eyelashes and asked them, "Wasn't that fun?" Fred looked at his brother. "I peed myself, I think." George looked at his brother. "I may never pee again, I'm afraid." Dropping her broom into place between them, she reached out and hugged them both. "But it wasn't all bad, was it?" she cooed. They grinned back at her and hugged back as well. "It was awesome," agreed Fred. "And terrifying," added George. "Awesomely terrifying," concluded Fred. Break in his quarters, Albus Dumbledore set out his robes, gold over white. The thread in them was goblin silver on the white, and the orichalcum that only alchemists could create on the gold. The patterns on them were not fashion, but power. Protections were woven in the silver runes on the white robes, and power enhancement in orichalcum on the gold. The Elder Wand, the deathly hallow said to be undefeatable in battle that he had from Grindelwald in the last war, was in its sheath. He reached out to the Hogwarts wards. Yes, the curse of the fairy for striking at the goblet of fire may have bound him to Hogwarts, no more able to leave than the lowest prisoner of fallen Azkaban. But upon its grounds, he could draw upon the castle's own power to be stronger than Grindelwald at his peak, as strong as the forbidden rituals had made Voldemort in the last war. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. The Dark Lord will mock him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. Dumbledore muttered, remembering the prophecy that had guided him for so long. He had driven James and Lilly Potter into hiding, as he had driven Frank and Alice Longbottom into hiding because of that prophecy. He could not face Voldemort. He had tried, and escaped with his life. If he fought him again, he would die. Albus Dumbledore, champion of the light, could not defeat the Dark Lord without a weapon. The prophesy would forge one. Either Neville Longbottom or Harry Potter was that weapon. James and Lily had to die to forge Harry into that weapon. Frank and Alice were worse than killed, but he no longer needed them, or Neville, so while regrettable, it was not a loss. He had left Harry Potter with the Dursleys so that he could be free of any will other than Dumbledore's. The boy who lived was the prophesied weapon Dumbledore would use to save wizarding Britain. To let him dream of a life other or beyond his use in that was cruel. Better the boy live humble and be properly grateful for his chance to serve. for his chance to sacrifice himself for the greater good. Griphook and the damned goblins ruined that, and now the weapon that was Harry Potter sought to turn in his hand, sought to flee from the battle he needed to die in. Worse, he reveled in forbidden ritual magic. One only had to look upon the inhuman face of Voldemort, that snake-like subhuman, nearly soulless demon of a dark lord, to see the cost of ritual magic. Merlin had come to free wizards from the rule of pagan ritual magic, from the wild magic of the elements, from the illogical cycles of nature and the earth, and bend reality to the sole whim and will of the wizard and wand. Dumbledore had stricken all knowledge of ritual magic from Hogwarts, had used the Muggle-born as a weapon to turn the pureblood houses from their ancient traditions, the ritual magic of field and farm, flock and family, to the pursuit of political and economic power. Like glass beads and whiskey, it took trivial rewards and instant gratification to turn the ancient stewards of the land into an aristocracy focused entirely on privilege and greed. The sacral meaning of Yule was glossed over with Muggle Christmas. It didn't take much, as the old traditions called upon the lords to sacrifice their own wealth and magical power to honor the ancient duties and rites. The dark powers called in those rituals were abhorrent to the light. The sacral meaning of Samhain was replaced with Halloween, because children would rather have candy than face the dead and learn their duties to care for them. He filled the castle with ghosts like clowns, so that the serious study of necromancy could be safely demonized and forbidden. After all, the Hogwarts ghosts hardly needed any such arts. Thus the laws to ban necromancy and its lore passed swiftly. Muggle Puritanism of generations past got rid of Beltane and Mayday, because fertility rituals were just too sexual for Muggle-born comfort zones, and without the ties to the land and nature, even the purebloods moved from fertility rites to marriage contracts as business matters. Although this had been the root of light magic, Dumbledore hated the rule of passion and ecstatic experience in these rites, preferring the dispassionate rule of will and wand, quantifiable by arithmancy, bound by rune not ritual. Voldemort cared not for the ancient customs, using ritual magic only for personal enhancement and dangerous dehumanizing enhancements at that. What he did to himself and his Death Eaters made it hard to face them in the last war, but served Dumbledore's political agenda as if Dumbledore had written the script himself. Ritual magic mentioned now automatically brought to mind Voldemort and his Death Eaters. He had banned the subject from Hogwarts, deleted it from history taught at Hogwarts, and banned the books through his acts of law in the Wizargamot. Now Harry Potter and his little friends thought to bring that ancient abomination back, using their rituals to fight Voldemort, rather than face him in open battle. Let them plot, let them plan. He was Professor Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts, supreme mugwump of the Iqua, chief warlock of the Wizargamot, champion of the light. When the time came, Albus would cast the children from the castle, and when Voldemort slaughtered Granger, Bulstrode, and Longbottom in front of his very eyes, Harry Potter would choose to charge forth to his fate and die facing Voldemort. Oh yes, Dumbledore knew a killing curse from Voldemort had backfired to kill him the first time to begin the prophecy. The next one would clearly finish the job, now that there were no Horcrux to deal with. Lilly Potter gave her life for the protection to protect baby Harry and strike Voldemort down once. Harry Potter will give his life for the chance to strike Voldemort down the second time. The army that Voldemort would bring would then face Professor Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, champion of light, defender of Hogwarts, and it would be that name that would go down in history as the victor of Hogwarts. No more goblins, no more ritual magic, no more tolerance for any magic that was not born of wand and will, clean of primitive passion and any trappings of mysticism and paganism. Albus Dumbledore would finish his revolution of reason, and magic would at last be purified of the last scraps of chaos. Only a few more children would have to die, brave sacrifices whose deaths would usher in an age of enlightenment and reason, of logic and light, under the benevolent guidance of Albus Dumbledore. It was truly for the greater good. Break, Voldemort closed his fist, and Tavers hang in the air, choking as Voldemort's power suspended him like a doll in its grip. No, Tavers, you will not lead the last of my Death Eaters to take Hogwarts. They are, as you noted, the last of my Death Eaters. Sighing, Voldemort released Tavers, a loyal but limited lieutenant. His best were all gone, all of them. Rockwood, Bellatrix, Malfoy, Darlowhalf, McNair. What did he have left? Crouch and Tavers, Carrow, Yaxley, and the lesser Parkinson. Not that the greater Parkinson was that good, but he was that dead, and that made even the lesser Parkinson a valuable commodity. Voldemort began the Silent War with 600 core Death Eaters. He had expanded his numbers in the shadows, recruiting and corrupting, but while he did so, that little brat Potter had started slaughtering his core disciples in job lots. Voldemort had won. He had finally taken the Ministry, a move so daring it stretched his available manpower to the breaking point. The Ministry was his, but he didn't have enough wands to control it. He used fear and violence to intimidate, but he couldn't watch all of them. He sent 100 with Malfoy to free the prisoners of Azkaban to get him the Death Eaters he needed to control the Ministry, and the Dementors he needed to cow resistance in all the places in Wizarding Britain he no longer had troops to control. Malfoy was gone. The ship was gone. Azkaban and the Dementors were gone. No magic could find them. It was as if the race no longer existed, and the island had never been. Voldemort held Britain in the palm of his hand, but he had lost so many fingers he was going to drop it. He had won. Stronger than Merlin himself, he had reached out with his own hands and pulled himself back from death to take the whole of the island for himself. Voldemort, greater than Grindelwald, greater than Dumbledore, he took it with his own hands, and now he found Harry Potter hadn't left him enough hands to hold it. That brat. Voldemort had been forced to move years early, and his new generation had not been indoctrinated, not been enhanced, marked, and bound to his will in near the numbers he needed to actually rule the nation. He had one school to take, and Britain was his. Had he even won Horcrux, he could lead the fight himself, but the prophesy warned of the power he knows not that Harry Potter still holds. Voldemort alone had the strength to topple Hogwarts, but he dared not use it. He had Death Eaters sufficient to take Hogwarts, but if he lost any of them, he would have so few that the witches and wizards of Britain would learn they could in fact resist, and Voldemort would be hard-pressed to stop them all. Still, he had the Ministry and its coffers. Why spend your own blood when you could spend someone else's? Even better if you bought that blood with someone else's gold. Voldemort faced McNair. The old man was hardly a replacement for his murdered son, but he was motivated, and he had brought a very special contingent to the table. How many giants made it across? McNair's voice was hollow and weak, due to throat damage from an old curse, not weakness of his own body or power. I have 24 giants, nearly immune to magic, strong enough to batter even the walls of Hogwarts down, if someone can keep Dumbledore from his tricks until they reach the castle. Turning to Carrow, he sneered. So the vampires are finally ready to earn their right to hunt. Lord Carrow looked back from a too-white face. His glowing red eyes met the red eyes of Voldemort, and he nodded slowly. My grandchildren warn me of goblin warriors in the castle, and a great ritual magic being prepared, one that I don't understand. That said, I have 80 vampires, 20 of them elders, ready to storm Hogwarts through the Black Forest. Turning to Fenrir Greyback. How many werewolves can you bring me? Voldemort hissed. Fenrir shrugged. I have 60, but only 20 are elite. You will have to move within a week of the full moon, or even those can only transform in part. 20 can full transform within a week of the full moon. You promised me another year before your war, so we aren't ready. Ask me for anything but time. Voldemort sighed, turning to the overeager Tavers. How about my mercenaries and recruits? Tavers worked his throat until he could speak again. I have 20 Auras who stayed loyal to us, another 80 from France, Germany, and Spain, plus the 100 of your core Death Eater disciples. Voldemort sighed. Number, take the Auras and the foreign scum. Take no more than 5 Death Eaters. I need you to rule Britain, and you can't do that dead. The scum will be masked and cloaked like our own. Let Dumbledore and Potter think that is my true strength and spend their ritual magic on it. I will let the giants breach the walls. Vampires and werewolves take the castle for me. Hogwarts will train my replacement Death Eaters for me. Voldemort's laughter made even the Death Eaters shake. Hanging on the precipice between total victory and total failure, the will and power of Voldemort shone through his flesh like a sun hidden behind dark glass. Even death had not stopped him. How could Harry Potter and that old doddering fool Dumbledore? Voldemort drew his wand. Begin your attack. I will join you in time to dispose of the old fool. I simply have to find a child and see if I can't pry from their screaming little mind what secret power the Potter brat has that makes him think he can face me. He has so many friends, I'm sure he can spare me one. The Battle of Hogwarts began, to the scamper of inhuman paws, the whisper of brooms, thunder of giant steps, and the cold, inhuman laughter of Lord Voldemort. 73. Chapter 73, Battle of Hogwarts. Luna Lovegood watched the Nargles and Raxburts. They always became agitated when crowds of witches and wizards showed strong emotions. Nargles fed off anger and fear, but it was the Raxburts that worried her. Looking over at Headmaster Dumbledore, there was a tornado of Raxburts, as if every Raxburt in the Hogwarts courtyard was being sucked into Headmaster's head, making his normally saggy cap stand upright, like a Raxburt antenna, a reverse funnel to channel all the Raxburts produced by an entire castle full of scared witches and wizards descend onto a single brain, filling it with the sort of fuzzy-mindedness normally only seen in senior Ministry of Magic officials. And retired Quidditch players who took one too many bludgers to the head or fell from great heights and landed on their heads. The headmaster's eyes blazed, and his magic flared, as if embracing all the Raxburts. No, as if devouring all the Raxburts to fuel the creation of a super Raxburt, the sort of creature capable of producing the very worst possible idea. A blibbering humdinger. She saw it rear above the headmaster, and roar its unheard roar, which sounded a bit like a duck getting a thermometer stuck someplace unrelated to its beak, then sink into his head, as the headmaster smiled the smile of one who has formed an idea of such pure elemental idiocy. The light of its very unbrilliance blots out all other thoughts and basic survival instincts. Running to where Harry, Hermione, Millicent, and Neville were discussing the final preparations with the heads of house who would wield the founder's items to balance the ritual, Luna broke the news with the sort of Luna Lovegood directness that others somehow got confused by. Oh, I fear Dumbledore has gone all ministry. He has been overcome by a blibbering humdinger, and will come up with the kind of terrible idea that usually requires an entire room full of middle managers trying to impress head office with their creativity to produce. Luna gushed, glancing over her shoulder at an advancing Albus Dumbledore, whose hat stood straight up, as if inflated by the power rolling off the headmaster like Bardiodar off a troll. Professor McGonagall smiled and patted Luna on the shoulder. Rest assured, Miss Lovegood, no matter how set Albus Dumbledore is against ritual magic, against any pre-Merlin magic, he is headmaster of Hogwarts, and too reasonable to risk his students in a battle your ritual will not get within leagues of Hogwarts itself. Hermione watched the way Albus advanced, the way he was thrusting his chest out, and flexing his hands argued that he was preparing himself not only for a confrontation, but for some form of dominance game he expected to win. Speaking softly and palming her wand, Hermione turned to Professor Sprout and asked, "What happens if the headmaster decides to be particularly unreasonable just now?" Professor Flitwick dropped Ravenclaw's diadem over his head and let its power fill him, the half-goblin's eyes crackling with power and will beyond even the legendary duelist's already potent norm. Then the headmaster will find out he may be the strongest wizard in Hogwarts, but he is not stronger than the combined heads of House of Hogwarts. Professor Snape gripped Slytherin's locket, Professor Sprout held the Hufflepuff cup in her non-wand hand, and Professor McGonagall laid her hand on the hilt of Gryffindor's sword in unconscious warning as the headmaster strode over to them. Without touching his wand to his throat, he cast a chantless and wandless sonorous, letting the very stones of Hogwarts echo his words like the voice of some elder god. There is no need for this foolish ritual or any such dark rituals. We have all that we need without resorting to the primitive and blood-soaked superstitions of peoples before the enlightenment of Merlin and the rationality of wands. Dumbledore thundered, and his magical aura flared in a display of strength that caused most of the students and staff to freeze in instinctive fear. The heads of house and Harry Potter's elemental circle were less than impressed, and Minerva McGonagall showed why she was named for the Roman goddess of wisdom and war. Albus Dumbledore, your objections had been noted and overruled. There is an army coming towards us as we speak. An army of giants, werewolves, vampires, Death Eaters, and foreign recruits eager to become Death Eaters. Voldemort is with them. Voldemort used less than a quarter of this strength to topple the Ministry, Albus, the Ministry itself. We have a handful of teachers and several hundred students, many of whom cannot defend themselves against an angry house pet, let alone a force greater than Voldemort used in any attack of the last 2 wars, neither of which we won. We will be using the rituals and letting the combined magic of the castle and every one of its teachers and students end the threat before anyone gets within wand or weapon range of our students. Albus smiled sadly at his deputy. That is your final word, Minerva, Severus, Filius, Pomona? He asked. They all nodded, and Professor McGonagall answered for them all. Aye, Albus, it is, she said proudly. Albus Dumbledore raised the elder wand and spoke, contract a sanction. All 4 heads of houses screamed and fell to the ground, writhing in the agony of the ultimate sanction clause of their employment contract. The spell should have killed all 4 heads of house, as the headmaster invoked the final defense of his authority over his staff in the event of rebellion. But the 4 house tokens extended the protection of their individual founders' protection to their head of house. The war between ancient protection and later death penalty in magical contracts set a magical clash, in each of them little different than the Cruciatus curse. Assuming Albus had completed his second to last sacrifice for the greater good, he turned his wand upon Harry's friends, all 4 of whom were already casting desperately. Neville struck to kill with a shouted Jira, and the golden scythe of the Reaper formed to cut down the most powerful wizard the light has ever known. Millicent slashed her wand right to left, hissing Isa, as she formed a wall of ice thick as her own body between the headmaster and the 4. Hermione ignited a fireball like a giant flashbang above Dumbledore to daze and disorient the professor, while Harry made a quick Soello Sun Power rune in midair to strengthen Hermione's flashbang to 10 times its power, enough to shatter eardrums on a troll and blind a dragon. Smiling softly, the defeater of Grindelwald strolled forward, unconcerned. His wand flashed up to raise a wall of earth and stone that Dumbledore shifted with alchemy to become high-carbon steel. The cutting scythe of the Reaper cut through 5 feet of steel before losing coherence. Dumbledore's wand caught the overpowered flashbang with the matchless power of the Elder Wand and the unrivaled control of the world's leading transfiguration prodigy. He took the fire and force of the explosion and drove it into the wall of magically reinforced ice, and it exploded with the force of a Muggle artillery shell. As they were still in midair, Dumbledore used his left hand to summon 3 sets of chains, which he wiggled his fingers in practiced motions to cause to bind Neville and the girls in enough magical chains to bind trolls, let alone teenagers. Harry had drawn his goblin silver blade in his left hand and his wand in the right, and it was more through luck than skill that he only cut himself lightly in his wand arm with the goblin silver blade when he hit the ground. Dumbledore did give him a chance to recover. The Elder Wand stabbed like the finger of death itself, as the will of Albus Dumbledore hammered into Harry Potter with last spell any Hogwarts student expected from their headmaster. Imperio. Dumbledore spoke, and the stones thundered his words to the sky. Harry Potter froze as the will of Albus Dumbledore hammered into him. Dumbledore smiled, gesturing for Harry to rise. I am very sorry, Harry. It simply was never your place to fight this war. Everything you have done, no matter how well motivated you may have thought yourself, was just wasted suffering and needless death. Before you were born, this part was chosen for you. The light gave me a prophecy. It was between you and Neville, you see, which it would be. Voldemort himself chose it to be you when he struck but failed to kill you with the killing curse. Blame him, not me, if you must, for once he marked you as his equal, your fate was sealed. Dumbledore waved his wand, and an image of Sybil Trelawney appeared and spoke. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. Dumbledore let the image fade, then smiled. "You see, my boy, you and I will advance to the gates. While I stand, Voldemort's legions cannot breach our defenses. Eventually he will come, and the two of you will kill each other, and I will banish the rest of his scum, securing the ultimate victory of the light. Granted, many students may die in the fighting, but all will see that the ultimate victory in this war, and in the last, belongs to the champion of the light. No dark rituals were required, no armies, no non-human allies. Only Albus Dumbledore, humble champion of the light, and the noble sacrifice of Harry Potter, the boy who lived, until he willingly died for us all." Dumbledore gestured to Harry. "Rise, my boy. You cannot face the Dark Lord on your stomach." Harry rose, wand in one hand, goblin blade in the other. Blood trickled down his wand arm from where his knife had cut it. Dumbledore tusked, then advanced with his wand to touch the cut, and muttered a quick healing charm. Turning to look at Harry, he commanded him softly, "Tell me you forgive me, Harry. Tell me you understand." Dumbledore said, because, no matter how necessary Harry's death had always been, like that of his parents, Albus felt a degree of guilt that weighed on him heavily. HMMMMM. Dumbledore grew distracted as his healing charm failed on Harry's arm. That was impossible. Dumbledore may not be a healer, but light magic, like that of healing, was his strongest tool. He could not understand how his healing charm failed. In that second of distraction, Harry's head snapped up, and his left hand flashed. Harry drove the knife of goblin silver into the arm of Albus Dumbledore, champion of the light, defeater of Grindelwald, and the goblin silver's effect of disrupting magic cut, not only through Albus' magical defenses, but drove chaotic the rush of magic to Dumbledore's wand, as he instinctively tried to banish Harry away from him. The blast of chaotic magic instead tore through Dumbledore's arm, blasting the Elder Wand from his hand like the strongest disarming charm, even as the magic reflected down his mana channels and into his brain in a wave of pain and disorientation. In blind, panicked Dumbledore screamed Ignis, and an unfocused wall of fire hot enough to vaporize steel lashed out at Harry, too vast to dodge, too hot to survive. Three sets of instincts turned one instant of combat into something that would be debated for centuries afterwards, and lied about by everyone surviving who actually knew. Dumbledore called a wall of fire to destroy the wizarding world's only chance of salvation in a moment of blind panic. Harry Potter shifted into his basilisk form because he was too goblin to not drag his enemy down into death with him, and Hermione Granger put her will upon the fire that it should not burn her Harry. The fire did not burn Harry, but basilisk reflex to defend its vulnerable eyes caused Harry to lower his first set of lids, causing Dumbledore to only be petrified, not killed. Harry's basilisk form was thrown through the air by the force of the explosion, and his own beta reflexes caused him to shape-shift back into human as he was torn from the fireball, to land in a somewhat controlled roll. Out of reflex, Harry rolled to and picked up the wand he saw beside himself, and rolled to his feet, both wands pointing at the downed headmaster. The entire courtyard full of witches and wizards saw Dumbledore cast down all four heads of house with a single spell. They saw Hermione, Neville, and Millicent defeated and bound without any effort. They saw the strongest wizard of the last century put a schoolboy under the imperious curse, one that could only be resisted by a stronger will and wizard, only to see Harry throw it off, disarm, and cast down the headmaster in a blaze of fire that left him standing, holding the elder wand taken from the headmaster, who lay broken and unmoving at his feet. Phileas Flitwick, in his later years, refused to discuss what he saw, because when he watched the duel in a pensive with the other professors trying to make official history after the war, only the half-goblin charms professor noted the unhealed wound in Harry's arm. Goblin silver wounds cannot be magically healed, for the disruption they make on magic is the goblin's counter to the wizard's wand advantage. At any range at all, the goblins are at a disadvantage, but no wizard who allows a goblin within blade's reach will live to learn from their mistake. Just as Dumbledore could not heal Harry with the goblin's silver wound in his arm, so too would even the imperious curse of the strongest wizard the light has ever known fail to bite on Harry deeply enough to control a power, and will as strong as Hufflepuff's only goblin warrior. The people need to believe in heroes. Believing that Harry Potter defeated Albus Dumbledore before even writing his owls is inspirational. Understanding Harry Potter defeated Albus Dumbledore because he fell on his own knife, and Hermione kept him from being roast snake is much less useful for morale boosting. The four heads of Hogwarts houses were released from the magical oath penalties inflicted by the headmaster with his defeat. They returned to their senses to see Harry Potter, bleeding but victorious, holding the elder wand Dumbledore took from Grindelwald at the end of the Great War to become the unquestioned champion of light. Harry was looking down on a bleeding and petrified Dumbledore. They watched as Harry walked to the headmaster, pulled his goblin silver knife from the wand arm of the headmaster, wipe it clean on his white and gold robes, and call softly, "Can someone get Madame Pomfrey?" "I seem to have broken the headmaster a little bit," Harry said plaintively. "You didn't kill the headmaster, did you, Potter?" Professor McGonagall said, getting stiffly to her feet. "Only petrified and stabbed a little." Harry answered happily, relieved to deliver good news. The deputy headmistress sighed heavily. "I will get Severus to brew a restorative after the battle. He will be fine by tomorrow." Professor Snape dusted off his robes and wiped the blood coming out of his nose with a silk handkerchief. He sneered his best sneer. "With regrets, Deputy Headmistress, it seems the intense pain of the headmasters using what amounts to slave punishment clauses concealed in our teaching contracts. I seem to have some memory loss around that particular potion." Severus Snape, potion master of Hogwarts, lied through his Slytherin teeth. Minerva McGonagall eyed the black-robed professor with a gimlet eye, then sighed. "That is regrettable, Severus. I will have to get Professor Sprout to brew it then. She is the living expert in all things mandrake after all." Pomona Sprout was dusting off the Hufflepuff cup and looking at the headmaster's petrified form like she was thinking seriously about kicking it. She turned to face the deputy headmistress and shook her head. "I'm sorry, Minerva. I don't think I can brew a restorative for the headmaster from my mandrakes," Professor Sprout said firmly. McGonagall looked at the usually smiling figure of the Hufflepuff head of house and chief herbologist. "Don't tell me you suddenly forgot how to brew the restoratives after Albus's regrettable lapse of judgment," she asked in a voice dripping with irony. Marching firmly to the headmaster, she gave him a very solid kick to the magic beans, then turned to face the deputy headmistress. "No, Minerva, but since he just tried to murder us all, then one of our children just to play hero again, I just don't give a toss if we leave him as a garden gnome for Greenhouse 3, Phileas Flitwick," staggered to his feet, poked a clawed finger into Dumbledore's bleeding forearm, then put it in his mouth to savor the taste. Administering another kick to the headmaster's delicate bits, he nodded to Harry Potter. "Excellent dueling reflexes, Mr. Potter. 10 points to Hufflepuff." The former European dueling champion and current head of Ravenclaw said with all the cheer of his normal persona. Only the burning gaze of a goblin warrior on the edge of losing control warned the attempt on his life by the headmaster was neither forgotten nor forgiven. Hermione rose once Professor McGonagall and came to stand before Harry with a worried look on her face. "Relax, Hermione. The ritual wasn't affected. Plan was always that we use the ritual and deal with Voldemort's forces before they ever reach the castle. Dumbledore defending the walls and wards was only ever Plan B. We just have to make sure Plan works now," Harry said. Hermione poked Harry in the chest. "You had better hope so, Harry. May I remind you that not only can you not work or use magic without at least 3 owls past, you cannot inherit any lordships to which you are entitled." Harry blinked, not understanding where she was going with this. "What are you on about, Hermione? We are fighting Voldemort and winning a war, not writing end-of-year exams. That is over a month away," Harry protested. Millicent started giggling, then laughing, having to lean on Neville not to fall down. The Slytherin girl already understood what Hermione alone of the Hufflepuffs had figured out. Hermione sighed. "Harry, you just stabbed and petrified the headmaster. Once he gets unpetrified, the very least he will do is expel you." Harry laughed. "You are honestly worried about that now," Neville swore. "Merlin's wrinkly wand, Harry. If we get expelled, the only other place we have to write our owls is the Ministry of Education. Millicent took her house by manifest right of conquest. She is already lord. The rest of us are just heirs." Harry frowned. but Voldemort took the ministry already. Hermione poked Harry again. That is right, Stabby McStabby Goblin Boy. Voldemort already took the ministry, and you just petrified the headmaster. Either we win the whole war and kill Voldemort in the next battle, or the only spell you will get to cast goes. Would you like fries with that? Harry shuddered. He was a goblin-raised wizard. He knew that no goblin would end up working at McDonald's. On the other hand, a goblin who never finished his schooling would never work an account at Gringotts, never stand as a guard. The only duties left were shoveling dragon poop in the dungeons. Merlin's saggy ballsack. Okay, now I'm scared, Harry muttered. Tucking the Elder Wand into his robes, settling blade and wand in their normal sheaths, Harry Potter swung his leg over his broom and sailed over the walls of Hogwarts. Neville and Millicent rode behind to the left and right, leaving Hermione to ride behind Harry directly in a diamond formation as they sailed over the walls towards the dark forest and destiny. The first battle of Hogwarts had cost the defenders Albus Dumbledore without a single enemy so much as drawing a wand. 4 students soared towards the woods, and a war none of them thought they were ready for. In the Hogwarts Owlery, the Carrow twins tied a message for their Dark Lord to an owl, and sent it winging to him where he guided his forces into the depths of the Forbidden Forest for this evening's final assault on Hogwarts. They had watched the duel, and like everyone else, saw only the single bright flash of Harry and Dumbledore trading blows, after which, somehow, Potter was standing holding the Elder Wand, and Dumbledore was broken on the ground. The Dark Lord would need to know this before battle was joined. No one knew what power it was Potter used to fell Dumbledore, but the Dark Lord could at least be warned it was real. 74. Chapter 74, Victory or Expulsion. Hogwarts Owlery. Day of the battle. Rufus Scrimgeour, former Chief Auror, current Dada Professor, and one-time candidate for Minister of Magic, reflected that the quality of today's Slytherins was indeed diverse. Draco Malfoy was already twice the wizard his father could hope of being. Millicent Bulstrode was a witch that would be spoken of in whispers for generations. But these Carrow twins were sad, pathetic copies of true villains. Letting the casting of his own spell disrupt his invisibility spell. Expelliarmus, Professor Scrimgeour said firmly, enjoying the looks on the Carrow twins as their wands sailed from their holsters into his hand. Testing the first, and disliking it, Scrimgeour tested the second, and it emitted a purple stream of sparks. This will do nicely, Scrimgeour muttered as he stabbed out the left-hand Carrow's wand twice, chanting, Facti Muse, Facti Muse. Scrimgeour then polished the wands with a special cloth soaked in purifying potion before dropping them on the floor before the 2 terrified Carrows, currently transfigured into very pale red-eyed mice in the middle of the Hogwarts Owlery. Can't have the traces on my wand, you see. Can't have any traces of me on your wand. Now you are probably wondering why the defense of the Dark Arts Professor has just turned Voldemort's pet spies into mice after they delivered all the latest intelligence to your precious Dark Lord. The 2 mice squeaked at him angrily, which caused roughly 60 owls to find them the most interesting food morsels in existence and gather themselves on their perches as if awaiting a signal. Scrimgeour made a calm-down motion with his hands, which worked on mice about as well as it worked on his, now ex-wife. The mice continued to squeak what he presumed were angry protests and threats. Scrimgeour shook his head. He would weep for his house if Slytherin hadn't also produced the Bulstrode girl. It is very important that Voldemort be lured to show up at the actual battle, but have just enough information to keep from risking his very killable self in the battle. Scrimgeour stopped and chuckled at the angry spies turned mice. The Dark Lord is quite terrifying on a battlefield. If he fought alongside his monsters and mercenaries, it might go rather badly for us. We really needed him to be so fixated on that whole power he knows not bit that he kept out of the battle until he could be dealt with all alone. Bloody decent of Dumbledore to go and share the actual prophecy with us. I mean, we guessed, of course, but didn't actually know. Even better for him to go full-on Lord of Light and get his ass petrified by Potter in front of you. Honestly, we thought letting you see the ritual prep would be enough, but old Dumbledore always loved his drama. Scrimgeour shuddered. Gryffindors. You just can't train drama out of them. Smiling softly, he said to the Caro twins, "What you need to understand is that we don't need you to spy anymore, and I am just too Slytherin to let you live after doing your best to betray every student here into slavery or death." The mice backed up and bared their teeth. "No, no, I'm not going to harm a hair on your head. You are students, and I am a teacher. That would be wrong. I am just going to leave the two of you juicy little mice here in the owlery in perfect health, while I go downstairs to take part in the defense rituals. As far as I know, and can testify under verituserum, you might well have escaped the castle and England altogether." Rufus smiled as the nearby owls screamed in what Rufus had to interpret as a solid bet against mice escaping. Shutting the door to the owlery behind him, Rufus whistled to himself as he skipped downstairs. The soft sounds of owl wings and the crunching sounds that could theoretically be any number of things unrelated to mice being torn to bits and pieces behind him. Drama is such a weak word. Deniability, now there was a better word. Stepping into the courtyard, he took a look at the irritated Professor Septimer Vector, who pointed to a place in the western circle of water. Sliding his wand back into its holster, Rufus prepared to open himself to a type of magic forbidden by Dumbledore even to discuss, and frowned on in all but the dark families in his own youth. Gathered in the courtyard, almost all the students and staff had volunteered to help. 4 circles of witches, wizards, goblins, centaurs, and hags chanted, sang, danced, and wove music strange and ancient as the 4 Hogwarts heads of house held the founders' tokens in the space between the circles, and power gathered to them like galaxies gathering around black holes. The power sank down into the stones of Hogwarts, and the stones themselves sang. The tower and wards woven into them shone in fairy fire that made the northern lights look like a dim and pathetic sight. Above the 4 Hogwarts heads of house was a floating Luna Lovegood, her eyes lost in a storm of rainbow power that crackled from her eyes like pastel lightning. She danced on currents of power no one could understand, but that she wove for those who lacked the eyes to see. The dreamer lost in the dream. She let the power move through her without resistance, for to resist, even for a heartbeat, would be to burn to ash before you could scream. She wove the power as it flowed through her, following the song of the earth itself, the song of the magic woven in the hearts of thousands of witches and wizards all over Britain who knelt in the dark and prayed with all their soul for magic to deliver them from evil. Luna wove the focused call of the ritual formed by the teachers and children of Hogwarts into a chalice and into a call. The voices of hundreds woven together in purpose, woven by the magics of Hogwarts and its founders, of the dedication of 1,000 years of faithful defense of wizard kind, became the channel for the formless and desperate hopes and fears of a wizarding Britain that was broken and conquered, that cowered in the shadow of the victorious Dark Lord, and prayed that the boy who lived would deliver them from evil. No will and no wand could direct such power. The power of a god could not be commanded by men and women, yet they could serve it, and serve it they did. Harry soared on his broom over the dark forest. He was drunk, and beyond drunk on power, and only the inhuman will of a lifetime of struggle allowed him to hold on to that small fragment of just Harry, that little bit of flesh and blood. The boy who would always remember his mother and father dying to defend him. The boy who remembered the clawed hands and fanged smile of the goblins that marked him with blood and power as their own. The boy who turned his face against the Dark Lord, who had taken everything from him once and thought to do so a second time, and told him no. Not this time. Alone in that storm of power, he felt the slither of cold scale and skin, the slit-eyed gaze of his familiar and friend. Noodle slid through Harry's thoughts, as if the ocean and storm of power were his natural domain. His gaze flickered over Harry in reptilian unconcern. Harry was not alone. Reaching into the storm of power, the screams of his dying parents became the scream of a dying Hermione who rose again in fire. The phoenix flame, the bright heart of his world, the hearth fire to whom he would always return, and which he would always defend. Hermione was here, in that sea of power. She was with him. A low growl sounded in the thunder, and cold washed over his skin and mind. The flashing white of a smile that transformed Millicent Bulstrode from hulking menace to glorious Amazon filled his mind, and the cold ice of stillness anchored him. Her ice-cold fury and determination an anchor in the storm of power he could never contain. She was here, In the storm and in the battle she was here. Casting his eyes down, he saw the forest beneath it and felt the call, the connection. The power in him went quiet as it reached down towards the earth. Neville was there. His fingers sank into the soil, a soft smile on his face, as unmoved by the storm of power as he was by the fear of the Dark Lord. Neville was the Lord of Earth, the sleeping power of the renewing earth, slow to anger, slow to move, but terrible and unstoppable once roused. Harry felt himself sink into Neville's quiet presence. He was here. Noodle wove them together, even as the runes in his chest burned. Othala, the rune of family, the rune that marked them all, the rune that those who knew little of the runes swore did nothing, was in the end the rune that powered all the rest. They were woven together in an ocean of power against the howling fear of a nation. 5 souls woven together looked up as one and went to war. Above the dark forest, Death Eater Travis had a fist of 5 elite Death Eater inner circle, 20 auras who had been their willing, corrupted, or coerced allies before the fall of the ministry, and 80 mercenaries from Europe and North Africa. 105 fully trained combat wizards, 6 of whom had been through the Dark Lord's strengthening rituals and training as part of his inner circle. They flew above the dark forest like a murder of crows, black robes flapping like the wings of so many carrion birds. The mad laughter of the witches and wizards turned the last light of dusk into the promise of blood and falling night. They were filled with strengthening potions to give them both magical and physical power beyond their limits. Blood potions to heal the damage wielding that much power would do to their bodies almost as fast as it happened. They were the elite killers in Voldemort's wizarding Britain, and against them was a single boy on a broom. The one who brought his head to the Dark Lord would sit at his right hand forever. They raced each other towards Harry Potter, a single word upon their lips. Death! Harry was lost in the power that flowed through him. The needs of a nation called to him. The boy who lived, they prayed to him like a god they abandoned, they scorned, they mocked. And yet in the hour of their despair, the god they fell upon their knees to pray to. The song of Hogwarts sang through the screams of a nation in despair. Through the prayers sang the promise of Hogwarts. Safety for the young witches and wizards, a safe place where those born with her gift could learn to touch Mother Magic, to hear her call and work her will in this world. Death! The figures on their brooms shouted at him, annoying insects distracting him from the flow of power, the conflict of needs inside him. Harry was ready to tune them out until the flash of green eyes and red hair flared in his mind. Mom, Harry whispered, seeing her die in the killing curse, seeing her damn and doom herself, binding her immortal soul to the destruction of Voldemort to keep him safe. Death! The invaders screamed as they charged towards him over the top of the forbidden forest. Harry looked again. They wore Death Eater masks, the masks of those who served Voldemort, those who murdered his mother, his father, Cedric. Harry Potter rose from the storm of magic that shook and shattered the world, and his eyes blazed the green of the killing curse. He looked upon the Death Eaters and heard their demand, the prayers of a desperate and defeated Britain, and the unbroken promise of Hogwarts. Harry nodded. So be it. Harry agreed. Death. He was Lord of the Sky, the first of the circle. His rune was Anza's, the rune of air of the sky, of inspiration and madness, and it burned upon his chest. The sun rune, the power rune, the rune of the killing curse, Soelo burned on his head so bright it bled lightning to the sky, as Harry Potter spread his power through the sky itself, stretching his hand out not like a wizard, nor like a god, but in the most delicate manner of a potioner. His power filled the air, filling the sky to let his will gather the power that roared and screamed in torrents and rivers into and through him. He reached out to Hermione, and into the calm air of the night of the last war came the heat of 1,000 forest fires. He reached out to Millicent, and the soul-destroying cold of the most ancient Arctic ice thickened the air into a white life-denying fog. The Lord of the Sky let the superheated air and supercooled air clash, and into that slowly turning cyclone he thrust his will. The sky screamed, clouds boiling into existence, then screaming like souls in hell as the hurricane-force winds drove the death spiral of his winds to claim the 100 proudly masked killers. Dozens were ripped from their brooms to fall screaming to shatter on the groaning trees beneath, but the strongest wrapped their power around themselves, or clung with desperate skill to their brooms and charged Harry with all their might. Muggles, at least those who don't study science, think lightning comes from the clouds. If they knew more or looked better, they would understand it is the earth that reaches out and the sky that answers. Harry was lord of the sky, and he knew better. Harry looked upon the charging wizards, and the crackling energy of the tortured clouds in his eyes marked those he would cast down. In the forest below, Neville Longbottom raised up his head and howled his rage, and the sky gave answer. Lightning lashed down from the sky, and Harry's will guided the net of jagged lightning that stretched down to spear through the charging mercenaries like the wrath of every war god unleashed. Only the half-dozen true Death Eaters survived, the desperate use of the Dark Lord's most potent shields against magic, serving to direct the energy aside. They charged at Harry, knowing they were only seconds away from wand range and his death. Harry cast a potion bottle into the storm, a wandless banishing charm shattering it, allowing the 100-kilometer-an-hour winds that passed him to carry the fine mist towards the charging figures. 6 Death Eaters hit a cloud of VX gas, and as their wand hands reached out, and their mouths sought to form the killing curse that had reaped both his parents' life and that of Cedric Diggory right in front of him, they fell from their brooms, nerves no longer able to command their hands to wave, their mouths to speak, or even their chests to breathe. Harry smiled. Potions was always more fun with Hermione. Turning his broom, he flew slowly back towards the castle. His mind came apart as he let his awareness flow towards his friends, whose war upon the ground in the depths of the forest had yet to be fought. Break! Voldemort stood upon the air, hidden behind illusions so powerful he could have stood in Dumbledore's office unnoticed. The far-seeing he had woven allowed him to see the battle in the sky unfold. He had planned to watch Harry Potter meet Travis and the mercenaries. 100-to-1 odds were enough to kill any boy, no matter how much potential he had. Voldemort was sure, yet Potter had cast down Albus Dumbledore in the heart of Hogwarts, a feat Voldemort was only mostly sure he could accomplish himself. The Carrow had told him both of the ritual Potter had directed, the duel with the headmaster, and the rest of Dumbledore's prophecy. The ritual Voldemort understood. Sacrificing others to enhance his own power had been his path to ascendancy. That Potter embraced ritual magic, for Voldemort had only ever studied the rituals of sacrifice and could not think of any reason Potter would use any other type of ritual magic. He understood. The prophecy spoke of the power he knew not, and Voldemort chose to risk others to see what that power was. Voldemort had seen, and still knew it not. 100 witches and wizards, as strong as any in Britain, flew against one boy, and he tumbled them from the sky with a hurricane summoned without even a wand, swept them from the sky with lightning, then killed the last half-dozen simply with an outstretched hand. Voldemort had cast his most powerful detection spell, and when his last 6 fell from the sky, Voldemort could not even sense a spell. Sinking to the forest floor from the sky, Voldemort decided he would stalk one of Potter's little friends. He had so many after all. From one of their minds he would drag out Potter's secret, then make it his own. It didn't matter if every other follower died. Once Voldemort had whatever power Potter discovered, he would be the only wizard in history books. Dumbledore, Grindelwald, Slytherin, Merlin, none of them would be remembered, only Voldemort, the true Dark Lord. Break, tied to a tree, Rita Skeeter looked at her photographer. "Tell me you got that. Tell me you got that," Rita screeched, her beloved hat sailing off into parts unknown, her hair doing its best impression of a distressed octopus in the high winds. Her photographer changed film with trembling hands. He glared at her. "I got it. I don't understand it, but I got it. I also peed myself and am seriously considering murdering you for dragging me into this, whatever this is." Poor photographer moaned in fear, then shrieked in terror as the tree they were in uprooted in the storm and fell down. As Rita and her photographer dangled like freshly caught flies in a web from their spell-wrought safety lines in the fallen trees, Rita gave him a thumbs up. "Immortality, darling. What I dragged you into was immortality. Those who record this will be quoted in every history book until the end of time." Rita Skeeter said happily, then used her wand to cut her and the photographer down. "Come along, there is probably more happening under the trees. We are war correspondents now, and that means we get into the thick of it." Rita looked at the darkness of the forbidden forest and smiled back at her photographer. "You first, darling," she said, pointing her wand at him. "Why me?" he asked, revisiting the idea of murdering her if only semi-seriously. "Because I'm the talent, darling. You are the support. Obviously, you can't let the talent get eaten by acromantula," Rita said reasonably. Beneath the trees, the next acts of the war would play out in darkness. 75. Chapter 75, Vampires, Werewolves, Spiders. The moon hung bright in the sky. It was twilight, the time between the darkness and the light, when the safety of the daylight world gave way to the horrors of the night. Fenrir Greyback had 60 of his best. The moon would be full tomorrow, so his 20 elite could transform fully and retain their minds. 20 werewolves with the minds of wizards and the instincts of the most perfect killing machine magic had ever invented. The magic resistance and regeneration of trolls, speed bettered only by the vampires, and strength beyond the vampires' wet dreams. 40 of the rest were able to partially transform, able to borrow the speed, endurance, enhanced senses, and healing of the wolf, but retain their ability to wield spell and wand to make up for their lack of fang and claw. Slipping into the darkness of the forbidden forest was like stepping back in time. Gone were the trappings of law and civilization. Gone was the pretending to be human. Fenrir Greyback couldn't even remember the name he bore before his rebirth as a wolf. That was his prey name. He was Fenrir Greyback, the leader of the strongest pack in all of Europe. Valdemar promised him time to bind the packs of England to his rule. He was supposed to have 300 werewolves already compelled to his service. But that Potter brat and his allies had forced Valdemar to move too soon. The packs of England were not broken to his rule. They had dared to defy the Death Eaters before Valdemar's return. Too many Death Eaters had fallen to Potter and his allies for their name to conjure fear and obedience enough to drive the werewolves to open war with wizard kind until Valdemar returned. Then Potter took Azkaban. The troops needed to hold and pacify wizarding Britain were gone. No Dementors, no battalions of elite Death Eaters who never denied the Dark Lord after his fall. Fenrir had not had Death Eaters or Dementors to force the British werewolves to obey him. Instead, his pack was being sent to make Hogwarts submit. That was fine. Fenrir had been promised the whole of House Hufflepuff would be his to turn. 1/4 of the next generation of British wizards would be werewolves, and Fenrir Greyback would be their king. Moving into the dark, he caught the scent of magic stirring in the wind, magic and fertilizer strong enough to mask the scent of anything else. That was their trick, to fill the forest with fertilizer to hide their scent from the werewolves. Fenrir threw back his head and howled to the nearly full moon, letting his body shift into a 12-foot-tall lycanthrope, a roughly humanoid wolf with fangs the size of daggers and claws as long as a man's fingers. 20 of his elite did the same, the rest drew their wands and snarled in answer as they moved through the forest. Brake, Griphook, and Fangborn stood guard over Neville Longbottom. He knelt with his eyes closed and his fingers thrust into the earth. The magic that flowed through the forest was fey and wild, and made the two trained Cursebreaker goblin warriors grip their goblin silver blades tightly. This magic was running wild, and every instinct told Griphook to run while he still could. Yet the Longbottom boy hissed in Parseltongue, his eyes closed, his face grown strange and terrifying, as if power blazed in his bones so strongly it shone through his flesh in the darkness beneath the trees. And it was a skeleton in a cloak made of boy who spoke from a place the living were not welcome who hissed at them. They come, 20 in fur, 40 in skin. Let the serpents follow, that none escape. Neville hissed, for not one step on branch, root, rock, or bare earth could be taken in the forest without its lord feeling it. Griphook and Fangborn looked at Neville, all remnants of the chubby, nervous boy who came with Harry, Millicent, and Hermione for goblin training was gone. The kind and gentle boy who spent as much time in the goblin nursery in the fighting cages was still there, but his frame was long and lean, flat muscles of a rower and warrior made him the picture of the Vikings bearing his name, who first came ashore on this island to make the Longbottom name one to fear. He bore runes graven in goblin silver in his flesh, and although Griphook had not feared any wizard save Dumbledore and Voldemort in his long life, he feared the boy who knelt in the earth before him, because the magic of the whole of Hogwarts, the magic of all those terrified souls of wizarding Britain who prayed for deliverance, This night howled through his body, in such force his bones shone through his flesh, and his face bore the serenity he bore when he tended his beloved plants. Neville was smiling softly and singing some song about under the harvest moon. It was more disturbing than any amount of rage or outward sign of magical manifestation could be. Break! As they crashed through the brush, the path seemed to open before them, and the werewolves howled their glee. Their speed increased, but Fenrir Greyback's instincts began whimpering in the dark depths below his boundless rage for his attention. Fenrir threw his muzzle over his shoulder, then paused in his sprint, his growl and claw gesture enough to keep his pack charging forward, yet his eyes and ears, even his nose, were giving him flashes of something that should not be. The forest was closing behind him. Thick vines grew between the trees, curling and flowing in ridiculous speed. The spaces between the trees were thick with venomous tentacula and Davy's snare. The hanging potion bottles in the trees had been what Fenrir noticed first, but rising from the ditches filled with unbelievably foul fertilizer rose plants capable of ripping a man limb from limb and binding even a troll or ogre. Fenrir growled at one of his human form werewolves. "Clear those plants. I don't want our retreat cut off." Fenrir growled, astonished at his own sudden fear at the thought he might need a path of retreat. He stalked a school full of children. The weakest of his werewolves was a fully trained wizard, rendered superhumanly fast, strong, more magically potent, and harder to kill than even the average Hogwarts teacher. What did he have to fear? Arlo Galloway raised his wand and shot out a bolt of cutting force with a shouted defindo. He slashed down and cut through meters of fresh greenery, only to have it heal in an explosion of growth that worked months of growth in moments. The vines of Devil's Snare shot like ropes to catch at limbs, while the venomous tentacula went full hentai with tentacles grabbing and probing every opening in screaming mouth and loose clothing. As Fenrir reached out his long claws to save his pack member, the bottles in the tree shattered, and an explosion of growth of delicate little green stems Fenrir wanted to ignore, but his instincts were now screaming to escape. Then the little thread-thin tendrils flowered, and purple monk's hood blossoms opened with the release of a familiar scent. Wolfsbane. Arlo Galloway began to scream, then to burn. His inhumanly strong and self-repairing flesh blackened and liquefied as the explosion of growth of the wolfsbane plant flowed down the tentacles and ropes of the binding plants to seek out the werewolf flesh its magic hungered for as the perfect growth matrix. Wolfsbane, the magic poison deadly to werewolves, the living plant devouring werewolf flesh the way Fenrir would devour a screaming muggle infant. "Burn it!" screamed Fenrir, gesturing to his wizard-formed followers, a moment of blind panic engulfing him as he cared not if the whole forest burned. That may or may not kill him, Wolfsbane would. A half-dozen witches and wizards formed beside their leaders and raised their wands to lash out with fire. But as the first one lashed out with a fire whip, screaming, "Inflamme!" 6 slit-pupiled yellow eyes opened in the firelight, and 3 basilisks delivered a war cry that the werewolves would never live to hear translated. "Dollar for the root singer," the basilisk hissed, and under their gaze, the first 3 werewolf wizards fell dead. Fenrir gave no command, nor did his followers need one. Wolfsbane could kill at a touch, but Basilisk could kill at a glance. He fled now towards Hogwarts, in part to conquer it, but in part to flee the death that stood behind him. Breaking into a clearing, Fenrir saw a single wizard kneeling in the dirt, the magic rolling off him so thick it was like an invisible fog. It stank of earth, of growing things. It sang of the sun, the earth, the cycles of seed and flower, root and branch, of death and rebirth. Fenrir knew this boy was the author of his pack's trap, and charged to meet him. The forest floor erupted in his path. A whooping willow bent down from the side of the clearing and smashed one of his elites into the earth. When he rose, impaled upon the branches, a goblin calmly cut his head off with a shining goblin silver blade, then faded into the shadows between trees. 4 of his elite charged the boy, but a strangler fig rose up from the forest floor, its tendrils winding around the werewolves like chains of living and oh so flexible wood. The crawling green of lush vines came from the scattered seeds the boy blew from his flattened palm, and Fenrir watched in horror as wolfsbane flowed and flowered all over his caged elite. The bands of pack failed in the face of such death, and two of the human form werewolves trusted to their speed as they shot into the forest at angles away from Hogwarts. But another pair of glowing golden eyes opened, and a basilisk happy hiss was all the warning Fenrir had that more basilisk were loose in the forest. The second wizard who ran did have a chance to scream. After all, Fangborn was not half as experienced as Griphook, his father. It took one sweep of his goblin silver sword to take the wizard's wand arm, a second his leg, and a third to drive the blade home through the werewolf's robed chest. Plants reached down from the forest edge like giants of wood and raged to hammer and claw at the desperate werewolves. Those who retreated into the clearing center were consumed by roots that reached up from below and impaled them like some recreation of Vlad, the Impaler's greatest hits, topped by floral crowns of purple wolfsbane to dissolve the screaming werewolves into surprisingly potent fertilizer as they returned their stolen magical potency to the hungry earth. Fenrir Greyback felt the venomous tentacular wrap around his limbs, but his was the strength of the pack leader, equal to any giant, and he tore free, determined to reach the boy who destroyed his pack and his hopes for eventual werewolf rule in wizarding Britain. He closed upon the boy, ripped him from the earth to hold him in the air, silhouetted against the almost full moon. Fenrir roared at the boy, for he was a few years shy of manhood still. Any last words? The boy's eyes opened, a startling blue in the moonlight, and his smile was far too calm for someone about to die. Yes, Remus Lupin says fuck off and die screaming. The name of the rebellious cub who he turned long ago, but who not only rejected his lordship, but actively worked against him in the last war stunned Fenrir for a second. 1 second is not a long time in most fights. 1 second is about a third, as long as Fenrir Greyback's own transformation into a werewolf on or near the full moon itself. Fenrir can be forgiven for his shock, when that second was enough for Neville Longbottom to transform into an animagus badger. That was the twin of Helga Hufflepuff's long-forgotten pet. Quite the largest example of common British badger that had been seen in Centaurs, and one that was famous among children for being the cuddle badger, the single safest and softest place in the world, because those who snuggled next to said badger had no fear of any darkness in this world. Fenrir Greyback learned why. Inhumanly strong, inhumanly fast, and blessed with regeneration close to that of a troll, Fenrir Greyback could absorb more damage than any 100 human wizards or any 20 goblin warriors. That just meant he took longer to die. At some point, Fenrir Greyback stopped fighting back, and the thrashing of his body was not the death struggle of the strongest werewolf in all of Europe, but the shaking of a body as its heart, lungs, and spine are devoured by an enraged badger. Fangborn and Griphook sheathed their weapons and stood back. The spray of guts, bones, and blood coming from the corpse argued that Neville Longbottom had surrendered his mind to his instincts, and the instincts of magic itself was that Fenrir Greyback, who had attacked and turned hundreds of children in his long, hate-filled life, needed killing. When the badger emerged from the most feared pack lord of Europe's broken body, he was stained in blood and covered in bits. He growled sleepily at the two goblins and curled up on the corpse, before the basilisk slithered out of the trees and curled up around him, drifting off into contented sleep in a clearing filled with the corpses of the strongest pack of werewolves seen in either of Voldemort's wars. Fangborn looked at his father and growled in gobbledygook. "Father, that is the boy you let guard the goblin children in the preschool." Griphook smiled and pointed at the devastation in the clearing. "Of course, son. What do you think will pass that boy to harm a child he is protecting?" Fangborn blinked, then admitted he still had a lot to learn before being able to take his father's place as clan head. Yes, no child in the Cuddle Badger's care need fear any force under heaven or crawling out most hells either. Break. Hermione and Noodle worked their way through the woods, striving to keep the half-dozen basilisks she had with her in something resembling a formation. Now the phrase herding cats came to mind, but it was the spiders that were the real issue. Hermione liked Hagrid well enough, in theory, but his understanding of perfectly safe creatures was wildly at variance with reality. Now Hermione understood this to be a strange position for a girl who was walking through the forbidden forest with a magical rock viper and 6 basilisks. but she had a certain amount of evidence on her side. Basilisk were intelligent magical creatures who bonded with the line of speakers, those who had the magical gift of parseltongue. The ones with Hermione were descended from Sura, who was Salazar Slytherin's familiar, and who had faithfully defended Hogwarts for 1,000 years, until Tom Riddle made a real mess of things, requiring Harry to fix them. Her basilisk were descended from that most perfect of Hogwarts guardians, and Harry, who had some impulse control issues, but was basically as good a Hufflepuff as you could ask for, and a decent father figure for the next generation of kill petrify death by the most destructive poison known to wizard-kind serpents in existence. Hagrid, on the other hand, befriended Acromantua, mostly Aragog, and all the many generations of his offspring. They ate each other, unicorns, centaur, and any witch or wizard they could get their pedipalps on. They were a problem, and Hagrid just would not realize it. He just refused to admit their continued and failed attempts to kill and eat him were not just childish play. Hermione had an army of vampires coming at her through the Forbidden Forest, determined to aid Voldemort in storming Hogwarts Castle, and promised the whole of Gryffindor House to feed on and turn as a reward. Honestly, anything less like a vampire than Fred and George Weasley was hard to conceive. Ron could at least make a decent zombie, and Percy wanted to join the ministry in the taxation department, and that was close to a vampire, so it was marginally possible. If you have one problem, you have a problem. If you have two problems, you can just use one to solve the other. Younglings, hissed a basilisk from out of sight on the right side. Full-grown acromantula were too big for a basilisk to eat, but the youngling were delicacies. Basilisk were snakes, and snakes were not given to long-distance persistent hunting. They tended to decide the meal in front of me is in front of me, and that is an amazing virtue in a food item. Basilisk are on a seafood diet. If they see it, it's food. Pythia, stay strong. Just chase the spiders into the vampires, and I promise you curry mice of a dozen flavors and honey-soaked acromantula eggs. Hermione hissed at her basilisk to keep them on task. From both sides and from Noodle came the hissing sing-song of her name. Speaker was the father, the first, the giver of the gift of the holy tongue. That was cool and all, but the only figure that drew actual reverence from the basilisk and Noodle was Mouse Giver. Dollar Mouse Giver, the serpents hissed, and the giant spiders of the Forbidden Forest fled before them and into the teeth of the Carrow vampires. Brake Lord Carrow was the eldest vampire. He had seen Dark Lords rise and fall, although Voldemort was the first to rise, fall, and rise again. Still, as a vampire elder, he took the long view on the conflicts of wizards, and even longer on muggles. The wizarding world had never been weaker. 2 blood wars under Voldemort, following that of Grindelwald, had left them weak. The rise of Dumbledore and his ridiculous light faction had stripped from wizard kind the blood magics that vampires feared the most, and the ancient magics of protection that had enabled ancient wizard kind to hold an armed truce with the vampire. At their height, the wizards had forced the vampires to accept giving up the hunt, in return for tame blood offered by ministry donors. The spread of the vampire legacy was controlled, and the taking of wizards as vampires was forbidden. What was left of vampire kind was weak, declining, and in his view, not even worth saving. The Carrow were different. They raised their children wizard and witch, and the strongest of those in each generation were turned as vampires. Those magical vampires ruled the house. Voldemort's last rise had cost them many. No more than 40 elders remained. He had half of those with him tonight. But when Hogwarts fell, the house of Gryffindor, the one who had forced them to give up feeding on wizards so long ago, would be theirs to feed on and turn. Voldemort may be the Dark Lord, and he may rule for centuries, but during those centuries, the Carrow would grow stronger, and when this Dark Lord fell as they all do, the Carrow would rise to fill the void and rule all of wizarding Britain. Nothing could stand in their way. The first spider attack was a surprise. Acromantula do not attack vampires. Nothing attacks vampires. The strong hold aside and hope they pass. The weak flee before them. They do not attack. Lord Carrow flicked his wand, Arania Exuma. He roared, and a dozen pony-sized acromantula were blasted away. One of his lesser vampires screamed, an acromantula the size of a horse pinning it to the ground, and driving its mouthparts into the belly of the vampire to suck the life-giving blood from it. Snarling, Lord Carrow gestured to the other elders to work their magic to blast the vermin from their path. "Defend the elders. They will clear the vermin from our path. Gather together," Lord Carrow commanded. Hermione looked at the mass of churning vampires and spiders and shuddered. They were about half a kilometer away. Whistling, she called Hedwig to her. The owl looked at her in curiosity as she placed an odd device that looked like a potion bottle inside a potion bottle. "Now, Hedwig, when you get above all the nasty, blood-sucky, creepy things, just drop this bottle. When it gets to the end of the string, it will pull the cork which causes the Weasley firecracker in the inner bottle to go off, which will cause my special VX potion to float down on all the nasty, sucky things fighting down there. Keep high and fly upwind only until you are clear, okay?" Hermione said softly. Hedwig pushed into her fingers for good scratches, then took off on her bombing mission. The vampires could be excused for ignoring an owl 100 yards overhead. They could be excused for ignoring the oily mist like rainfall coming from above. After all, there were few in the wizarding world who even knew what nerve gas was, even fewer who knew that magical creatures had nerves too. Anatomy, not directly related to the circulatory system, had always been a weak point in vampire education. That would prove a disaster today, as Hermione had driven the vampires into a strategic concentration against the Acromantua her basilisk drove against them. It would only be a few minutes before the superior vampire gutted the giant spiders, but for those few minutes, they were all standing together in one easily seen target. Lord Carrow did not know what it was, but something caused the spiders to start to collapse. Then some of his children began to collapse. They stared from sightless eyes, unable to speak or move as their bodies trembled as if they had been stunned, yet he felt no magic. Instinctively, he raised a Protego Ultima shield around himself and his 6 bodyguards. Others of his elders cast their own protection, and Lord Carrow noticed the differences. Those who cast spell barriers all died. Those who cast directional barriers died. Those who cast simple low-powered bubble wards lived. Lord Carrow looked at his own shield, a power-hungry monster of a shield that could hold off even fiendfire for a few minutes, and noticed a fine sheen of golden oil upon it. A potion. Someone had used some sort of potion to kill his children, the flower of over 100 years of Carrow clan selection and investment. With a wave of his wand, he cast a powerful hellblast of fire surrounding the whole clearing, burning off the potion, but creating a maelstrom of fire from which his children must now break free or die in the fires of their own salvation. Lord Carrow charged forward, driving his bodyguard before him. 6 elite vampire sorcerers, and Lord Carrow behind them. The scream was all the warning he got as 4 of his 6 elite died in less than a second as they closed on the single human heartbeat they could detect. Lord Carrow saw the scaled bodies of great serpents and saw his elite warriors fall dead, even behind their shields, and in that second knew his clan had died, even though he still might save himself and avenge his children. So the basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets had been loosed. Well, Lord Carrow remembered. Without the speaker to control it, the basilisk was no threat. His spells might not bite a basilisk, but no witch could survive them. "Ignis Tempestus," Lord Carrow roared, summoning a fire tornado, hot enough to devour the witch in front of him and to force the basilisk to close its vulnerable eyes. Covering his own eyes with his arm and wrapping himself in the most powerful anti-magic shield he could muster, Lord Carrow ran straight ahead with the speed of a cheetah on a caffeine binge. Hermione and her basilisk stood unmoved, save for the flaring of her hair, which danced playfully in the flames that were hers by right. Drawing her Walther PPK, possibly the most heavily modified small-frame pistol in the history of magical technical hybrids, she released 2 9mm steel-jacketed rounds, accelerated through the rail gun formations to several times the speed of sound, flaring the head dissipation runes and stressing the silencing charms and anti-recoil formations to the limit. Hitting with roughly the power of 2 tank killing rounds from an American A-10 Warthog or Apache R-64 gunship, the rounds blew the vampire lord's heart out through his spine, leaving holes big enough for a small owl to fly, though. The closing to fang and claw range was usually the winning move for vampires. But then again, vampires are not usually using that tactic against basilisk charged with defending Mouse Giver. The last vampires screamed as they died, but died they did. The basilisk basked in the fires as Hermione let the firestorm, ignited by Lord Carrow, burn the whole of the battlefield, and about half a kilometre of forest into ash, lest the remains of the VX gas make it into the water table, or remain to contaminate creatures other than vampires and spiders. Hermione might be enough of a pragmatist to commit war crimes, but she was still Hermione Granger, child of dentists, believer in the rule of law, and Hufflepuff who believed hugging out your issues solved more problems than violence. She was surprisingly talented at violence, but honestly, as an option, she didn't like it very much. Hermione sighed. She wondered how Millicent was doing with the giants and where Voldemort had gotten to. Honestly, she had a terrible feeling when he did show up. It was going to be a real problem. 76. Chapter 76, A Real Problem. Walden McNair was happy, sitting his broom with his Death Eater mask on, his wand in its holster, and his beloved runic axe in his hand. There was a heavy orichalcum bracer on his left arm, carved with snake sigils and crawling runes that seemed to slither and move on their own if you looked at them too long. It had been crafted by his own Dark Lord, and was bound to the collars affixed to the giants who had chosen to serve Lord Voldemort. They had taken service with him, and their chieftain Grump thought it fitting that his followers be bound by collars of obedience, that they never rise against him, as he rose against Frostbjorn, who had been chief before him. He forced his followers to kneel for the slave collars made by the parcel magic of Voldemort, the only magic of compulsion that could work past the magical defenses of the giants. Grump knew that an army of giants that would ignore fear, ignore pain, even ignore their own death wounds to keep pushing forward, could throw down the greatest magical kingdoms in history, let alone the complacent modern wizard enclaves who gave up power for secrecy. It had come as a great surprise when Voldemort forced Grump to his knees for his own collar. The giants were a war-winning weapon for whoever controlled them, and that control was never going to rest in the hands of a lesser species. It had been McNair's greatest honor to be chosen to wield this weapon in his Dark Lord's name. Not as great an honor as the remaining Death Eaters thought, as the bracer did not link the giants directly to McNair's mental commands, but to his dark mark, so that Voldemort could control them himself. McNair was not Lucius or Crouch, who dreamed of equality with his Dark Lord. Like Bellatrix, McNair knew he was little more than a weapon in the Dark Lord's hand, but he was a weapon unsheathed and finally sent not on a raid, but to war. His was the task to drive the giants through the defenses of Hogwarts, for while Voldemort himself would shatter the outer wards, the stones of that castle had laughed at 1,000 years of invaders and would be overlords. The magic soaked into those stones ignored fiendfire, laughed at lightning, stood firm in quakes which opened chasm 100 meters wide, just meters from their foundations. But the giants had shattered the walls of Asgard in the hazy depths of prehistory. The giants had assailed Olympus, had warred with the protectors of the magical races of the European continent in every mythology from Persia and India to Ireland. They did not have the intelligence to use magic as wizards did, nor did they need to. Magic was rooted in their bones, flowed in their veins, and gathered in their muscles, and radiated from their skin like heat from a forge fire. In Grindelwald's time, he had sent giants upon the Muggle battlefield, and they had ignored tank guns and artillery fire to shatter the Muggle armies when it was Grindelwald's will that his allies should win. In that war, a half-dozen giants had shattered French resistance to the German panzers. In this war, McNair had 24 giants to assault a boarding school. Raising the axe he had been reduced to using for executing magical creatures for the Department of Control of Magical Creatures before his Dark Lord returned, McNair howled his joy to the sky, and the giants, feeling the sweet power of his rage through their collars, beat their chest like huge war drums and roared their own defiance to the sky. They moved to a jog, for no giant could truly run any more than could an elephant, and the ground shook as they came. In return, a single figure on a broom sailed before a wall of white. On a broom, with a banner staff in her hand, the flag of Hogwarts, and its 4 houses flying in the wind, she, for the long, flowing, midnight black hair proclaimed it a witch, sailed lazily back and forth across the empty fields the giants had to cross to reach Hogwarts. A wall of white boiled behind her, a storm wind blew from her back, making the flag fly before her as she drove it like a spear into the center of the field, only to see the shaft of the flagstaff grow a pillar of ice, until the flag itself was enshrouded in a wall of the same, clear as any looking glass, framing the Hogwarts flag spread out to face her enemies. McNair cast a far-seeing, and as he did, the face of the girl, for she was no woman full grown, but a maiden in her years, locked eyes with him as if she could see back down his own far-viewing in return. She was as broadly shouldered as him, though not heavy with the muscle of his sex and years, yet there was in her frame and face the same brutal promise of power and violence as his own. Walden McNair touched his wand in its sheath to borrow its power to cast his voice to his distant foe. You aren't even pretty enough to rape. Still, I might make the giants do it anyway. The smallest of them is 20 feet, so I don't imagine you will have long to complain. McNair sneered, letting all the power of his rage and sadism infuse his words. The girl threw her head back and laughed. Offering an upside-down fist, she slowly extended her middle finger in a very Muggle obscene gesture that McNair had seen from quite a few Muggle-borns he had abused or murdered over the years. Still having performance issues. You know, an engorgio charm will make even a toothpick look like a slightly undersized wand long enough for you to get the job done. If you can't get that quill firm enough to press parchment with, then I do know a good and discreet potioner. She can put ink back in even the limpest quill. The girl laughed. Before McNair could respond, a shadow formed above the field. Voldemort gathered the darkness like a living thing and formed a projection of himself 100 meters tall. His bald serpentine head hissed as he spoke with a voice that shook the earth and shattered the heavens, carrying even inside the walls of Hogwarts. Enough! I am Lord Voldemort. I am the Dark Lord. As the sun fades on this last day of Hogwarts, I am the darkness that comes. Kneel and beg my forgiveness. Beg to take my dark mark and serve me, and you may yet live. Those that do not accept the dark will not live to see the dawn. Voldemort's projection spoke with all the power of his legitimacy, and his will, a will so strong that no one could resist it, hammered the air like the will of God. Millicent Bulstrode let her wand slice the air in the simple downward slash of the rune Isa. She hissed the name in Parseltongue, the language of serpents, the deepest language of sorcery. Her wand became a spear, and she stepped from her broom to plant it into the ground, and ice ran from it to cover the ground, and the white clouds of snow blasted on hurricane force winds to drown the giants in a sea of killing cold. The voice of Millicent Bulstrode sang from the ice as the water witch, the ice queen, threw her own challenge to Voldemort. Letting the power of the ritual fill her, flow through her like the primordial mists of the void in the time before creation, when the universe was formless and eternal unchanging cold, she spoke at last. Before the first dawn was the eternal ice, before the first breath was eternal death, before the first fire, cold was and cold waits. All that lives shall die. Eternity will not be cheated, riddle. There is nothing here but death, and you will not even leave a corpse to bury. McNair's blood ran cold as winter beyond the dreams of winter hammered down on him in moments. Grounding his broom, for he could not see to fly, he staggered forward in the face of a wind that sought to flay the flesh from his bones. He drew his axe and let his power roar through it as he slowly moved the potent magical focus through the motions for his strongest shield. And then warming charm as even the powerful charms in his robes that had allowed him to hunt whales on the Arctic ice failed in the face of this ancient, killing cold. The giants strode forward, eyes slitted as their desire to flee from the storm failed against Voldemort's will to drive them forward. Still, they formed a boar's head formation, a wedge of flesh that offered minimal frontage to the howling cold and allowed those behind to push those in front. The giant advance slowed to a crawl, but they advanced still. These giants had come from that primordial time, and while they knew the ice could kill them given time, it could not kill them swiftly, and they did not have far to go before it no longer mattered. McNair followed his giants, huddling in the lee of their terrible forms, but against the soft rumble of their giant strides, he heard two sounds. One was the brazen cry of a hunting horn, a horn that sounded so loud and strong that only magic could power it. Then came the sound of hooves. the sound of hooves that shook the earth as powerfully as an earthquake. Millicent Bulstrode was not alone. Her command of the ancient ice, of the source of all waters, was vast, and the power of the ritual drove it to a level that would have muggles invoking ancient goddesses of the ice and night. But that alone could not possibly be enough. This was not winter, and the ice alone had insufficient power here. Herries will sublimated the very sky to her will, and his winds cooled the flesh they touched deeper than liquid nitrogen could, and drove the ice crystals in the air to cut like the flaying knives of butchers as they tore into the advancing giants. Hermione wove the song of fire into that of Millicent's ice, for fire did not oppose the coming of ice, but clear its path. Hermione let flames blaze high above the storm, stripping all the heat and from the air, and casting it back from the sun, even as Neville reached down into the bones of the earth and drew all memory of heat from its surface. Ice may have been the power that ruled the battlefield, but fire, air, and earth wove themselves so deeply into the song of ice that its power should be unstoppable in this world. A nation of wizards prayed in the dark for someone to protect them, someone who was not them to take up this fight. Inside the walls of Hogwarts, a song of defiance and hope was sung, the great ritual shaping a prayer to magic, a guide, a form for the needs of a wizarding nation, for a wizarding world to craft its own deliverance. Spear in her right hand, horn in her right, Millicent Bulstrode raised the horn to her lips and let the power of magic sound in its call. A challenge to uphold the wild freedom of magic from the will of a dark lord who vowed crush anything that was not his own. A storm of hooves and rage gave answer, as 100 centaur and as many unicorns blazing with the white purity of the unicorn's promise of hope, drove across the ice-swept killing fields and broke upon the wedge of giants like the incoming tide. The great bows of the centaur are made of living wood, and the strength that draws the bow infuses both the bow and the arrows they shoot is like that of the giants, the strength and magic of the living earth. Powered by the storm of the ritual's power, they tore from the bows with the shattering roar of thunder, and each bolt hit with the force to split mountains. The long spiral horn of the unicorn is the most magical creation of the wild magic, capable of piercing any shield, any hide, and whose touch purifies all that it reaches. The unicorns hit the giants at the run, and their horns did not only pierce the hide of the great monsters, but the enchantments both protecting them and binding them to Voldemort's will. Shorn of their magical protection, the flesh of the giants began to freeze, and when struck by the arrows of the centaur, to shatter. Great wounds opened in the almost unkillable beasts, and pain such as their long lives had never experienced was theirs for the first time. A giant fell, and then another. Grump howled and struck with his great club, striking a centaur dead as he did. With a howl, Millicent charged forward, an ant challenging a lion, but as the giant's club slammed down, Grump found, like so many others, that Millicent Bulstrode was not a normal witch. The punishing and endless training of Abita had been her own creation and joy for years, and the added training of the goblin fighting pits had put a killing edge on a skill already two-thirds war. With a shouted cry of Defindo, Millicent drove her wand-cord ice spear into Grump's skin. Piercing no more than a foot, Grump had time to laugh at the puny attack, raising his club before she spoke a second spell. Issa, Millicent spoke, and the primordial ice lanced into the flesh of the giant chieftain, freezing blood and bone in the space of his last heartbeat. The club slowed and stopped as the arm driving it ceased being flesh and became ice harder than the hardest stone, before Millicent whispered a quiet, reducto, and the blasting curse shattered the ice that had been the strongest giant in Europe into fragments that would, in a few months, melt into bloody meat and bone. Walden McNair felt fear grip him as this Amazon witch killed his strongest giant with a spear thrust. He cast his killing curse with a scream closer to fear than rage, Avada Kedavra. It shot from his runic axe with the power that had ended so many would-be heroes in his master's wars. Claws of ice, the size of the ancient cave bears unseen, in millions of years reached up from the ice to shatter under his spell. But stop it, it did. Drawing his wand, he cast again and again, alternating killing curses and liver-boiling curses, each as unblockable by magical shields as the last. He saw the girl laughing as she wove between them. She was muscled like she should move slowly, but she danced across the ice like a wisp of a girl, not a valkyrie with a spear. In desperation, he dropped his wand and wielded his great beast-killing axe in the swift arcs that had ended more than one charging beast. For the first time, his axe rang as it struck something, but it was the ice shaft of the spear, a spear which reversed to slam into his knee with a crack like a beater bat on a porcelain bludger. His knee shattered, and he fell forward. A second strike passed the blade of the ice spear through the meat of the back of his right upper arm, and he felt his axe slip from his fingers, even as his now unresponsive arm failed to stop his fall to the ice. She didn't even bother to finish him, as three passing unicorns trampled his body to meet paste, as the proud slayer of magical beasts died under the uncaring hooves of centaurs and unicorns. A dozen giants had died before McNair, but with his life ended, the control of Voldemort was broken. Without a living Dark Mark holder to connect Voldemort to his colors, the giants were free of his control, and with both their chieftain and half their number slain, and their own flesh torn and freezing, the giants lashed out at each other in a blind panic to escape. 4 giants lived to break free of the storm, 4 giants out of 24 that would tell the world of the death that awaited those who raised wand or weapon against Hogwarts defenders. The army that had been raised to topple Hogwarts had fallen. From the howling storm, an unseen figure wrapped in darkness closed on Millicent. The ice and snow were her eyes, and even invisible, it was as clear to Millicent as if lit by the noonday sun. Striking out with a shouted defindo, she speared a cutting curse at the figure, only to have it swatted aside like a troublesome insect. Reducto, stupefy, incarcerus, issa. Millicent chained her spells together in a stream, only to have them deflected or shattered by power greater than her own. Her last spell, a desperate hammer blow of killing ice, finally drew a verbal response from her attacker. Hissing in Parseltongue, he screamed fiendfire, and a basilisk of living demonic flame flowed from the wand of Voldemort to rise into the air and descend on her like the manifestation of the hatred of all life. Hissing in Parseltongue, Millicent replied in kind. "Dalla kiss my ice, Voldemort," Millicent hissed, as a rock viper of primordial ice, who looked a lot like Noodle, rose up to strike at the fiendfire. As the demonic fire attempted to swallow the smaller serpent of ice, the ice serpent dove inside the serpent of fire and appeared to be trying to consume it from the inside out. Voldemort recoiled in horror as his fiendfire turned into the circle of the Orobis snake, eating its own tail, as the flickering blue-red serpent of fire and ice devoured itself into non-existence. With a wandless banishing charm hitting her like a wrecking ball, Voldemort shouted an Expelliarmus to disarm her. Following with an overpowered stunner, he hit her with a Crucio to draw her screaming from unconsciousness before she even hit the ground. Writhing in agony, she flopped helplessly on the ground, while Voldemort cast another fiendfire serpent to surround him and drive off her troublesome allies. Stalking to the prone and defeated witch, the greatest legerdemain in history peered his snake-like slit-pupilled eyes into Millicent's. Pointing his wand, so like Harry's own, at Millicent's eyes, Voldemort spoke almost cordially. "You fought well, better even than my late beloved Bella, but you have something that I need. When I am done pulling it out of you, I fear what remains will be of little use to anyone. I am sorry, my dear, but this will hurt a great deal. There can never be a power I know not." The end of his wand blazed like a star as Millicent's inner and outer world shook as the voice of an angry guard spoke a single word. "Legimens."